Hi, I'm Laurel Elders, founder of the Level 2 ICF Accredited Institute for Integrative Intelligence, where we specialize in ICF standards. I've been a professional coaching geek since 2005. I'm now a master certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. In this video, our objective is to help you take the ICF exam fully equipped mentally, emotionally, and logistically to help you pass the first time around. I want to note that to date, today is March 28th, 2024 is when we are recording this. The coaches who graduated from our PCC Level 2 training have 100% first-time pass rate. So as of today, the ICF also reported that the global pass rate averages 75%. And the 100% pass rate includes the previous exam called the CKA, Coach Knowledge Assessment, which we're also going to be discussing today. So we're really proud of that, and we'd like to share our approach with you to help you get fully equipped. So I do also want to note that if you are trained at the PCC level, this tutorial may be absolutely enough, depending on the program you graduated from. So level 2 programs with a very strong core competency focus and ICF core competency focus will naturally foster a higher first-time pass rate. If your school did not have a heavy emphasis, and after this video, you still aren't clear on some of the distinctions that we're going to be covering, there is always an option to get private tutoring. So if you're really confident after this video, if everything is clicking and making sense with what you've learned, then this video could be absolutely enough. And again, a private tutor can help you locate quickly any gaps that you feel might exist. It's also important to note, if you did not attend a level 2 PCC program, as of the recording today, things are always changing. So I'd like to point out, as of today, the ICF is piloting an ACC level 1 version of the exam. So if you graduated from a level 1 program, or if you had any large gaps in your coaching education, this tutorial may be supplemented with private tutoring of the core competencies, again, just to ensure that if you have any gaps, a private tutor can help you quickly identify those and get you up to speed. In today's video, we're specifically going to be covering what to expect logistically. We're also going to have some folks that passed the first time around. They're going to be offering their tips. And we're also going to cover additional tips for passing the exam that will help equip you emotionally and mentally. And then towards the end, we're going to do a deeper study of the distinctions and nuances. We're going to cover questions that we've got 3 to 4 people who are preparing to take the test. They're going to bring their questions, and we're going to get all of those answered. So without further ado, let's dive in and get you fully equipped and ready for the ICF exam. All right, thank you everyone for joining us for the ICF exam tutoring session. I have with me Matthew Centron Quinones. Matthew is a skilled and educated mentor coach in private practice and also here with us at the Institute. We are going to co-facilitate today's lessons. Matthew, feel free to say hello.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here and especially to be a part of this dialogue for this ICF exam. There are certainly lots of things about it floating on the internet. And so anything that we can do to best prepare you and possibly, what's the phrase, quash some myths or myth busters? Yeah, them. We're happy to do that today.
All right, so we are gonna just start right off with logistics, just really quickly. Logistically, what to expect. There's 81 scenarios. Each scenario is a one-on-one coaching interaction. There's 2 parts. Once one part is complete, that closes, and then the next part opens. You can flag a scenario to go back to, but only within that part. So just note that. The top score is 600. You need 460 to pass. However, some scenarios are weighted for difficulty. And there are 3 hours offered. So be sure to give yourself that entire time. home test taking and center test taking are the two options that you can choose from. And let's see, Danielle, did you do home? Okay, so Danielle took and passed the ICF exam not that long ago. And
Right. It was in December.
that's right. Yes. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what your experience was with the home testing.
Well, when you sign up for it, you get a link to test out your computer to make sure that it's meeting the requirements. I highly suggest doing that the day that you sign up, not the day of the test, because it's just too stressful. And per my husband, he also took a similar test with the same company. His computer did not work, and he was trying to do it 5 minutes before. So I gave him my computer knowing that it would work, and there you go. I thought it was fantastic doing it at home. They have you take a picture of your ID. They have you use your laptop to look at all areas of the room, what's on every single side of you to see if you have any cheating material or any help or anything distracting, and they would have you clear that. And they do have you have your phone with you, and you have to show your phone in the room, but it has to be out of hand reach, which is also interesting. And yeah, you just kind of get started and jump right in.
Do you have, or did your husband have a Mac?
No, it was
Okay.
just a normal Windows laptop. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. I only ask because Matthew, you had mentioned something about sometimes MacBook users can have some challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the different folks that I know in my networks and work, I have not historically heard that folks have been successful doing the check-in, preparing for the exam with a MacBook, given that Macs are much more sensitive to any kind of overall systematic changes, which could include allowing a specific program to access a webcam and things of that nature. So I have also taken different tests from home, and those have always been through Windows as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then Allie's also contributed in the chat firewall issues if using a work computer. So just some things to consider if you are considering the home testing option. And then Matthew, you took the exam at a center. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. What was your experience like?
I had a really positive experience. This was my first time taking um, any kind of test at a testing center, I think, prior to graduate school, besides the GRE. So it was a very simple process. When you sign up for the exam, you have an options to pick where you're going to take it. It shows you a map of your area and what are some available centers. It's also important to know that there there may be actual testing centers or places that are authorized to do the testing. So you're not necessarily going to see testing center A, B, C. You might see a name of an organization. And so that was one thing that I was a little bit confused about because I wasn't really sure um, how that was going to work. But when I got there, it was almost like a little vacation, a special day. I dressed comfortably. I drove out to the place and they checked my ID, did a little security scan with a metal detector, and then I was taken to a little booth with a computer. It was actually quite spacious, had noise canceling headphones, which really helped a lot because it's a shared space and folks are taking all sorts of proctor tests. Um, and I had a very comfortable experience, and it was nice that if anything became challenging or the tech was really something unusual was happening, you're highly encouraged and have the person working there to support you and to do what you have to do to get you back on track, at least from the technology perspective.
Mhm. Oh, that's great. Thank you.
On the online one, there is always an option there to talk to a proctor, and you can click that. And so you always have a proctor there that can assist you as well.
Okay, that's great to know. All right, so the next thing to consider is every scenario basically is going to have 4 responses. And in this, you're going to be choosing the best response and the coach's worst response. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And you are given the results right away. However, we did have someone took it that closed out too soon and didn't get the results right away, but was emailed shortly after. As soon as the ICF got the results, then they were forwarded the results. All right. And so again, these are on page 2 of the handout, so you can refer back to them at any time. And then we'll also be including the link. And a couple more things to point out. They are doing an ACC pilot. And so if someone who is watching has only gone through a level 1 program, just know that that is potentially in the works, but currently it's just the exam is as it is. And the other thing to note is that this exam was, well, not this exact one, but the exam process was previously called the CKA Coach Knowledge Assessment. The ICF shifted it to the ICF exam. So just know if you hear that language from someone who's taken in the past, that was its previous name.
Laura, may I add to that?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I'm language is really interesting and important to me. So I do want to acknowledge, yes, the CKA no longer exists. It is not even a colloquial term that folks might be using to describe this exam. Now, also, sometimes folks might be saying the ACC exam, the PCC exam, the MCC exam, and I think that can unintentionally create a misunderstanding because there isn't a specific exam for each credential, with this possible exception of the ACC exam. Likewise, you might also encounter folks referring to the process of submitting your recordings as the ACC, PCC, MCC exam. That is not an official term. That's specifically called the performance evaluation. So as you're connecting and going over these resources, just very clearly we're referring to the official term is the ICF Credentialing Exam. Any other variation of that is just a misunderstanding, a colloquial attempt, but certainly there's only one exam out there at this time for all 3 credential levels.
Danielle, thank you for sharing your experience. I do know you have to hop off early. Is there anything else you want? Actually, let me take this down. Is there anything else you want to share about your experience?
I remember I really wanted some paper to write down kind of mnemonics that I came up with and stuff, and nope, you can't do that. So that was an all shucks moment. I did flag anything that I had questions on, didn't feel confident about, felt like it was a guess, and was able to go back and review all of them on the first half, but I was only able to review like half of them on the second half. Just be present and make sure that the questions are tricky because a lot of them are applicable, totally applicable, but it's where are you in the coaching process that matters as to which one is the best and which one is the worst, because all of them can be correct. You just got to focus in what is the question saying, where are you at? And those details will be in the question. So you really have to pay attention. But take your time, flag everything that you can, and go back and review. And yeah, enjoy it. I didn't study much. I had a couple of sessions with Laurel that she helped me with to kind of understand like those practice questions, because I got, I think, every single one of them wrong when I first took it. And I was like, oh no, this is going to be horrible. But, you know, she walked me through it and kind of helped us figure out why something is the best and why something was the worst. And then it clicked. And then I just carried that with me through the test and easy peasy.
Yeah, and I was just so impressed that your study time ended up being shorter than anticipated, and yet, and it had been years since you'd graduated, and you still did amazing. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, it was 2016 or 2017, somewhere around there. So yeah, it was wow. And there you go.
Yeah, and I think it attests to too when you really grasp the coaching concept of coaching versus other modalities. It's like the principles you know you're really looking at. What are the principles?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. So feel free to stay on and or hop off either one, but thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
You're welcome, and good luck, everybody.
Laurel, I have a question, and Matthew, thank you for addressing this earlier, but I think I'm still a little confused. I was under the impression that there were separate exams for ACC, PCC, NC, because I hear people saying I took my exam and I passed, and now they're PCC or now, they're NCC. So what we're talking about is an ICF exam for ICF credential. And then in order to get each level ACC, PCC, is that just submitting the hours or is there something that goes with each of those levels? I think I'm still confused about that.
I'd be happy to take this one, Laurel.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is a very common question, and I'll do my best to address it as simply as possible because it can get very nuanced. But in general, no matter which credential you're going for, they all require the same 5 things: training hours, mentor coaching, an evaluation of a recording or recordings, the practical hours you've done with real clients, and then taking an exam, this proctored exam. So the exam part's the very last thing for anyone to do. For instance, we just met Ray in this call. She has passed her 2 recordings for the MCC, arguably the most difficult part, and now her last hurdle is to take this exam. So the exam comes at the very, very end. And so what comes before that is having your recordings evaluated, logging all the work that you've done, all of the training, and then putting it all in your application. And so the only thing, every credential level has 2 sides to it. There's the quantitative, how many numbers of things have you done and achieved? Then there's the qualitative, how have you demonstrated what this credential represents? So the main difference at this moment is the qualitative differences in terms of how you coach as demonstrated in recording, and also the quantitative, how much of certain stuff have you done. But as of now, the exam is the same exam for every credential. So for instance, you could take the exam tomorrow for your ACC, and in 2 years you're ready for your PCC. You would take the exact same exam. I'm sure there'd be some new questions, and then 5 years from now you take it for your MCC, and it's the same exam.
Okay.
That's the current format as of now. However, as we mentioned at the beginning, a lot of things do seem to change, but the ICF website keeps us updated. With that said, there's also even already a new nuance that I think is worth sharing with our viewers. If you take the exam and you pass, within 12 months of your passing date, if the opportunity presents itself for you to upgrade credentials, so ACC to PCC, PCC to MCC, you are actually exempt from taking the exam again. So that's quite nice. That's also not a very common scenario. It might be more feasible going from ACC to PCC, but certainly if you took the exam for your PCC today, you're not going to accumulate 2,000 hours in 12 months, unless when you applied for your PCC, you've already had a significant number of hours.
Okay, moving on to tips. This is from a previous test taker as well. Just some things to consider as you're going through the process. So many responses may be very similar to each other. So as Danielle was sharing, looking at the nuances of the wording, and we'll get into some of that when we do our deeper dive. An example given here, ask them why they did what they did, ask them what factors influenced their decision to. So some of the language can be similar. So looking at the context of the scenario, are we in agenda setting? Are we in the wrap up? Are we in the middle of a coaching program? Are we at the beginning of a coaching program? That can help determine which direction would make the most sense and is the most coach-like answer. The second one is the worst suggestions sometimes still seem very reasonable. So again, if this happens, check on what part of the session or what part of the context is the question being asked under. Scenarios also included some executive coaching scenarios where coaches are contracted with a third party. So here's something to consider. And Matthew, you brought this up when we spoke the other day. It's like, what is the heart of what's going on? Because the coaching principles are still the coaching principles. The ethics are still the ethics. Whether you're in a group, a team, or with an executive, the principles are still the principles. So they translate. There's no surprises there. But Matthew, if you want to speak speak to that anymore, feel free.
Yeah, I would echo my own words that what you are currently sharing since when we talked last time. Yeah, there's often different comments like, oh, the exam's really executive coaching based. The scenarios, yes, it did seem like many of the scenarios involved coaching a manager or working with a director with a very executive themed, but certainly it's the same essence of whether it was someone else or a different profession, especially when you think about, this exam is not testing the very nuanced scenarios of when there's 6 contracts and this one requires this. We're not getting into that. They're looking for a fairly standard assessment of how do you establish and maintain the agreement, not just the session agreement, which you've all practiced and mastered, but certainly how does the agreement look like between you and a client, especially when the client is perhaps an HR department, the head of a company of any sort. And so it you can change the profession. It's still the same. We have 3 people, 3 sponsors, X, Y, and Z. How do we navigate this? So I would invite you to not let the executive coaching scenario cause any panic if that's not your primary niche to any degree.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So also, before we dive into the nuances, I thought it might be helpful to just share a couple of different tips for passing and approaches so you can take this into your own study and today. So one approach is you can actually begin by reading the answers and just kind of get a feel for what they are, and then read the scenario. So for some people, that just helps it click in a little bit better versus if you read the scenario and you tend to overthink, especially in exams. If you're an overthinker, you might start thinking of what to do. So if that's helpful for you, you can switch the process and start with the answers. The next thing is just really to let yourself off the hook. You've done the hard work. You've attended an ICF and graduated from an ICF accredited program. That is no small feat. So you know the coaching principles, and really to trust that knowing. I did work with some people that felt really pressured to memorize all the ICF core competencies. Yes, it's great to read them and be familiar with them, just to help them really ingrain. But it's the underlying principles of this is coaching. This is going against coaching, right? This is truly honoring the client, the best response. This is overriding the client. This is really overriding the client, worst response. So really connecting with what do I see as the principles? And some examples of things to consider is the example completely following the client's lead versus the coach leading? Is there curiosity? Is the coach assuming anything? So anything that's uncoach-like, if there's little curiosity or there's assuming. Is there full transparency, openness, and honesty from the coach? Is the coach being responsive to the client's needs and offers? Are they being ethically responsible and responsive?
I think it's some great advice, Laurel. I really do. I love the first one too. I hadn't thought about that. And so begin with the answers first. The funniest thing is I was taking the practice one, and that's exactly what I was doing. And I didn't realize I was doing it. So I thought that was perfect. It's like, good.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. What it makes me think about just going through the coaching certification process itself, right? I remember at times feeling really overwhelmed with the technical aspects of it, right? That we were trying to learn and practice. And it really helped me just in our own group coaching sessions, and supervision to just remember that it was about sort of the underlying principles of coaching and to bring that spirit with me into my sessions. And that really helped me, I feel like, to do better and get less in my head about it. And so I'm hearing that for this as well, right? Is understanding the underlying principles will be more important than kind of being formally caught up, for example, in memorizing the competencies as opposed to like understanding what they're about.
Yeah, I'm seeing Danielle shake her head too.
I really appreciate this list of under the approach number 2, these examples of, these are the competencies in living form, so to say. But I actually really appreciate what's kind of down just on the top of the next page, which is the flip side. Because that's helping me understand or pull apart, like following the client's lead. Well, what does that really mean? And then on the other side, directing and leading and assuming, oh, right, that's the opposite of it. So then it helps me remember what is it really getting to.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the segue. So directing, leading, assuming, hiding a bias, taking over the agenda, unethical or lack of ethical awareness, like those are all, flags. Even if they're subtle, they're flags. Like, okay, that's not entirely coach-like. The other thing to consider is the coach introduces a bias, if there's evidence of any bias. And then the third tip is create a plan so that you feel comfortable with the process, whatever you decide, whether that's home study or at a center. So having a plan that works to support you and make sure the logistical pieces going into it. You can also go into the exam if you tend to have test taking anxiety. You can go into the exam with maybe some breathing exercises or something to just calm and remind yourself, I do know these. I do know what coaching is. And just, have maybe something to help anchor that in for you. All
I
right.
believe both sections are timed. Was that right, Matthew? Were both sessions timed? Like you had like a certain amount of time for each one?
Yes. So they've divided the test up, and then while the whole experience is 3 hours, there are limitations. So part 1 will be certain amount of time, and that time, if you have extra of it, does not transfer over to the next section. So to some degree, you're taking 2 smaller exams.
Yeah. And that was helpful because that deep breathing through that. I took advantage of that break between the 2 to just kind of walk around, get my blood pumping and stuff. Of course, I was at home, so I could do that easily. But that was really nice. So you're not thinking about, oh gosh, I have 160 some questions to do. You have the 80 some, and that's nice chunk of time. And I used literally every second. My time ran out on both of them, and I was like, perfect.
Danielle, when you took it at home and you had the break, did they have you redo any of the measures?
Yes, they had me move the camera around again to make sure there's nothing, like they have you turn the camera completely behind. So, what was behind the computer, in front of me, both sides, they did have you redo all that again, which did not impact your time or anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So is that part of the 5 minutes when you were to take it at the center?
You're given, after you finish part one, if I remember accurately, there's a pop-up. It's you now have a 5-minute break. It shows the timer. And then I believe you either are welcome to step out of the room or you can signal the proctor to escort you out. But yeah, so the 5-minute break is part of it. Now you can take longer. From what I remember, just the time is going to keep going, so it would require less time, or you would have less time on part two. And if you don't use the break, it doesn't mean the part two is 5 minutes longer.
Right.
All right, so we are going to dive into the nuances and the actual learning. So if you have made any questions from when you took the practice exam, you can go ahead and pull those out. We're going to start with just go through each scenario. If you are studying from home, I do invite you to pause the video at this point and take the first set of test questions. So that would be pages 3 to 10 of the study guide provided. And then when you're done, compare your answers to the answer key, note any questions, and come back to resume the video. All right, coaches, you've taken the practice questions, and let's see if you have any questions about the answers? So we're going to go through or start with scenario 1. So in this one, coach is meeting with a prospective client who's growing a new business. The coach and potential client quickly establish an easy connection. So right there, it tells us prospective client. So we haven't yet started the coaching engagement. Any questions about this one, scenario 1? Pretty clear and straightforward. For scenario 1, our test preppers didn't have any questions. So just note the focus is on ethical implications. In coaching, we always err on the side of transparency and disclosure. Number 1 is the worst because it's a 100% avoidance. Number 2 is sharing, just not completely. Number 3 is leaving it up to the client. And in coaching, it is 100% the coach's responsibility to disclose conflicts or potential conflicts. And number 4 is the best because it is full disclosure and transparency. Scenario 2. Client is struggling with delegating tasks at work to other team members. During the last session, the client shared an important project. Coach supported the client in identifying strategies. At the next session, the client reports back that they decided to complete the tasks. The coach feels disappointment. What should the coach do? So we're already in the coaching engagement and the client is reporting back. All right, any questions about the answers on either of these, the worst or the best?
This one I found a little bit of a challenge for myself. I can offer that. When I first read number 3 to set aside the disappointment, like that felt like, yeah, okay, I can do that. And so this was one of the ones where it's like there was an answer that was kind of a yes, then there was another answer that was a yes, yes, like it had like it was even better. And so that helped me like, oh, wait a minute. And then I really appreciate how also in this third option here, they use the mentor, they throw in the term mentor coach.
Mhm.
And then like, oh, wait, I need to stop and define what is that? And is that properly being used in this context?
Mhm.
Yeah, really good catch because that would be brought to a supervisor. Right, yeah, not necessarily a mentor because mentoring is about the actual skills.
I also liked the fourth one here. I was about to choose that because I default to encouragement of the client. And this points out here that praise or encouragement is not always in the client's best or highest interest because it is kind of offering an evaluation when we offer that encouragement in a particular way, especially in the way that it's described here.
I think Allie's actually bringing up a really important point, and that's also how we define some of those terms that we use every day. So when I hear encouragement, I'm thinking about encouraging the client to continue to express themselves, to be in the safe space, to give them the space. But there's also giving encouragement. I would interpret that as synonymous with praise. And so it's really interesting because I was receiving what she was saying quite differently, but it also makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So it's important, I think, to understand how are these terms really, how do they really mean, and how are we using them in this context?
Yeah, so to me, I'm thinking like the praise coaching, pure coaching's like acknowledging, observing, and celebrating, right? Versus praising, it's like good job. Yeah.
Because, for instance, maybe there'd be an option saying encourage the client to continue sharing their thoughts, and that would be a very likely strong response. But offer encouragement that they're the best human in the world, that'd be very nice of you, but that is likely not a coach-like response.
Well, and I thought this one it was a really interesting wording of the question and of the scenario, because it actually was about the coach and not necessarily the client. It says the coach feels disappointment that the client did not follow through on their plan. What should the coach do? And you can certainly take a look at 2 and 3. I think you're absolutely right, Alan. On 3, I think the thing that disqualified 3 was the fact that it was talking about mentor coaching. It wasn't applicable to what the scenario was, but the second one was very, very clear. That one was absolutely take a break, stop, they're responsible. It was all the way through based on what the scenario said and the wording of the scenario.
And just to talk about the distinctions a little bit. So mentor coaching, as I mentioned, is specific to skills inside of a session, like the PCC markers, for example, is how the core competencies are demonstratable and observable. Whereas with supervision, we bring everything else that could make us a better coach. We can bring that to our supervisor. So struggling with a session, struggling with something internally, having a bias show up, that's all brought to supervision. So I just wanted to just call out the distinction if it's helpful.
I think what's coming up for me is how to maintain that focus at the, let's say, second hour in the second half, to pay attention to these nuances and continue to keep up that way without water.
That made me think of like, I'm wondering if there's, in that create a plan part, if there's some sort of like reboot, and that might be different for everyone, but something to consider like, oh, how can I reboot my system and click back in?
Yeah, because when I took the CKA previously, I did actually rely a little bit on chewing on the gum because it wasn't as strict with proctoring to keep me focused, except we don't have access to those things. So I've been kind of visualizing how that might go, kind of like a tennis player visualizing the whole match. So yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Like something that could replace the gum?
Breathing.
I like to use essential oils that help with concentration. It's a little hack I use sometimes when I know I need to stay focused for a long period of time. Can we talk a little bit just in terms of answer 1 and answer 4, the difference between the coach taking the lead and coach taking the direction?
Yes, let's see. Coach taking the direction. So immediately reflect back what they could have done differently to support the client following through. There, the coach took the direction by deciding to reflect back and identifying what they could have done differently. And you said number 4?
Mm-hmm. Just that distinction where one is the coach taking the direction versus the other one is the coach taking the lead.
I see them as this like similar, the lead and the direction. I don't know, Matthew, if you have any ideas on that distinction. I think they're either way, the coach is leading or deciding which direction to go into. I don't necessarily see that them as different.
Someone had shared that when they were, and forgive me who that was, but that when they were doing the scenario, one was yes and one was yes, yes. I
Mhm.
think the reverse might be true. So 1 is no, but then 4 to me is no and no, because number 1, you're praising. Again, super nice of you, not the role of a coach. And I perceive the second half as, hey, why did you fail? That's a pretty harsh way of receiving something. So to me, that's very directive and just not really responsive to the client. The first one, it's a reflection, so it's not really going to cause any harm, but then it's focusing on what they could have done differently. And so it's moving into territory that's not necessarily been invited. Um, so it's I would compare it as no and maybe no and definitely no. So go with the definitely no one.
Got it. No, that makes sense. That's helpful. Thank you.
So scenario 3, client comes to session appearing stressed when the coach asks what they would like to talk about. The client frantically, I can read, lists a major event they're planning at work, large family gathering they're organizing, and caring for aging parents. What should the coach do? Any questions on the best and worst on this one?
I think this is one on the worst scenario, where 2 and 4 are really interestingly close. And so when I was looking at this one, I had to think about this one for a second, as far as the worst, right? So, and you kind of finally come to that point where 4 is the option just because of the position the coach took. So I thought that one was interesting because I had to think about that one for a little bit.
Ask the client to share more. Ask the client to begin. So asking the client to begin somewhere is really directing and leading. Yep. Asking the client to share more, not the best given that there's multiple things going on.
I think Laurel brings up another great way of looking at this. As we try and decide of the 4 options, which responses are not the greatest use of our time, but certainly, you know, things are probably going to move on. If we ask the client, please, will you share more about your aging parents? That's just going to fill up space with the client telling stuff that they already know. So it's filling the coach in. So to me, that's wasted energy and time. However, and in other words, the session might be able to quote unquote bounce back. With 4, we're giving a very narrow direction. So even it's like, so it says, ask the client to begin. I'm imagining, how about we begin by doing this? And that sounds very directive and very leading and doesn't respect what the client, to what we know thus far, really wants to actually use our time for.
Mhm. I found on this one that the first answer, that there was some nuance that I wanted, like there was an impulse for me to, yeah, that would work. And then wait, I had to catch myself and realize 3 definitely felt to be the stronger answer, but there's a lot of, like this is the one where it, like there's not, it didn't feel really wrong, right? So it's kind of more that nuance difference here. Because it feels like such a natural impulse to, wait, I see you're stressed. Do you want to take a moment before starting? Kind of a thing.
It's also interesting too, because to me, it's like the client appears stressed. So it's almost like an evaluation or a potential assumption by the coach. They may be, they may not be. So, acknowledging that 3 significant challenges were just shared and asking about the priority. So it's acknowledging or what's important to the client. And I also want to bring up, as I was doing some private tutoring a while back, and what was shared was, the best answers seem to make more sense, but sometimes it's the nuances on the worst. So, just getting to that, what is the worst, really, really looking at that. Also note on scenario 3, we are at the beginning of the session and therefore still setting the agenda. This informs the correct answers. In coaching, the coach does not determine the session direction or agenda. So the worst is the coach determining the session agenda. The best is to not assume and ask into the agenda item, since we're still under agenda setting. Scenario 4, university biomedical research is working with the coach. Anyone have any questions or thoughts on this scenario when you went through the test?
This one didn't feel as tricky to me as some of the others, so this one felt pretty clear.
Mhm.
I think the first one being the best makes sense, and it made sense to me. I think where I kind of could feel how easy it is to overthink it, right, is on 4. I think also I was like, well, if obviously they're just like handing me the journal without like talking about it. So I'm like, how am I acknowledging the fact that like maybe it feels like they're uncomfortable? And so I think that made 4 also feel more accurate to me because it just jumps ahead a little bit into like, okay, well, like, you know, what has this done for you and what awareness has this given you? But I think, yeah, it makes sense to give them, you know, to check in first, like to ask if they do want to explore how they feel about it.
Right. Yes, because that is truly client driven, right? Versus just jumping ahead. Scenario 4 is also a great reminder that if the answer is obvious, to trust that and move on to the next one. Save your energy for the ones that will be more nuanced and you want to give some more time to think through. All right. And 5 was the coach recently began working with a client for planning for retirement. Any thoughts or questions on the best and worst?
This one to me was a little bit tricky. I really wanted to go for 3 to acknowledge, right, that retirement is a significant life transition and that emotional responses are normal. And this got me thinking around how it can be kind of like a response for me based on training that is coach adjacent that I've received, but is not pure coaching. Right? Because my coach adjacent training is around normalizing all emotions. But in this situation, in pure coaching, is even normalizing is a type of interpreting and assigning a label to. Yeah, so this one was a bit trickier for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm glad you brought that up because when going through this exam, we are looking at just purely the coaching model of client directed, client identifies, client discovers, right? So if we're normalizing something for the client, that's not necessarily them coming up with something. Yep. So we're looking at, is this aligned with coaching core competencies versus other, bringing other modalities in.
Laura, I'd like to add something that's coming up for me. And is that okay?
Oh, please. Yes.
Wonderful. I'm also noticing as we think about just the language of the best and the worst, I'm really thinking about when we think of something when we think of something that's the best response, I think that has the most impact, the greatest value to the client, whereas the worst is either the way opposite direction, might even cause harm. And so that's how I see best and worst. And as I look at the other two, I'm thinking, sometimes they remind me of steps you could just skip, or you might do them and you're back to where you started. So for instance, you might say, are you sure you want to retire? Yes. And if you think about it, then you're back to your next 3 options. So that didn't really do anything. You can bounce back from it, if you will. Even if you were to say, well, those are normal that's a normal response. Okay. And so I'm also thinking like, well, what actually has forward movement or what has backward movement? So those are some of the thoughts that I'm noticing, at least with this example. And I'm wondering what else is coming up for the group.
That was great.
I
Matt,
think,
by the way.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so when we look at 1 and 2, the interesting thing for me, and I almost chose 2, and the reason why, because I thought it was an incredibly irresponsible response. Because I'm asking them if they want to retire. My planting a seed Like, am I really hijacking this moment when I'm asking that question? So that's where that's where I kind of went with that particular answer. And then finally it came to dawn on me that one was really it. But I thought that's an interesting choice that would be so close to each other. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, Laurel, and kind of how you pair those two together.
Yeah, that's interesting. What stood out to me is ask the client if they're sure they want to retire. We do double check with our clients, right? Just double checking it's not self-sabotage, or it could be something else, right? But completely switching gears would not be coach-like. That's what came up for me. Matthew, any thoughts on that one?
I think it makes a lot of sense, and it certainly is in this realm of navigating the nuances of what is coaching and what is not coaching. And might I add, this is an ICF assessment, so it's also important to consider what is the best response for an ICF aligned coach, what is the worst response for an ICF aligned coach. Since this beautiful industry we're in is not regulated, we have some great bodies out there, but we're also looking at what do we know about this organization to be true from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah,
really feel the first to answer with the first one of just pausing and completely and utterly ignoring this really strong emotion in the room. Like that one to me was like, oh yeah, definitely not that one.
Yeah, so it's that responsiveness to what's actually going on. Yeah, I think to Cole's point, I think that was the distinction, is like here the coach is still somewhat kind of not, asking, double checking, whereas this one it's like the coach just completely ignored that the client began to cry. Right.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
in number two, at least, like even if it's not the right response, at least they're responding to the client, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, the concept of partnership, this is about client and coach partnership is what comes up. Not to mention the second one, to Matthew's point, it's like meh, but it's also closed question. Are you sure you want to retire? Fundamentally. But whenever I look at the answers and when I can see the partnership with both, because 2 and 3 feels a little bit to me coach-led, what's coming up for them to want to ask that question. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you know what the voice I heard in my head when I read number 2, by the way? Well, are you sure you want to retire? That's how I heard it, rather than a coach voice. So it's probably the impression I had. So
I appreciate what Matthew said about the direction. And I think I took a similar approach when I was reading these questions to ask myself as a coach, am I staying with the client, or am I moving them away, or am I moving them backwards? What am I doing in these answers? How would that impact the current situation? And I think that helped me a lot of times to come up with the best and the worst answers.
So 6 was the clients working with a coach to support them during an important career transition. Any stuck points on this one?
When I took this, I had selected for the worst action, I think number 4. So this one was a little tricky for me.
Yeah, I was gonna share the same. It's interesting, especially thinking about that last one, because I think I processed this one as, at least in the first one, like maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the coach is acknowledging the person's not answering their question, right? Whereas in the fourth one, this seems like they're kind of ignoring what's happening. That's how I took it. So it's like I thought the first one was bad, but it at least acknowledges that they didn't respond, whereas the fourth one it's just kind of like, oh, well, keep going.
Mhm. Yeah,
One
and
thing I loved about the best answer here was that we really get to somatics at this point in time and understanding, you know, watching that client and looking for those moments and giving us the opportunity to something that I saw. I went straight there on this one. Mhm.
And the first one felt like interrogation to me when I read it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of if you've asked somebody, like, where do you want to go on vacation this year? I want to go to Disneyland. Okay, well, where do you really want to go on vacation this year? You're not really accepting the first value. Like, no, I want you to answer what I'm thinking. So I'm going to ask it again and see if you get the picture.
yeah, exactly. All right, and the 7th was coaches working with a client who's experienced marathon runner. Any stuck points on this one?
This one was definitely another one for me that had like a lot of nuance between the options. And so I had to listen for my yes again with this one.
Nice.
Like, because the first one is like a generically good in approach. But yeah, but then when we got to number 3, it was like, ooh, use of metaphor. Yeah, that just feels even righter. Yeah.
I felt like in terms of some of the tips that y'all gave in the study guide, of like really being with what's present in the question, where it said the coach notices that the client often uses running metaphors when talking about their challenges and progress in their writing. That kind of stood out to me as like, okay, I'm looking for that to be a relevant component of this answer. And so that definitely was helpful to me. It made that stuck in my head. So then it made 3 kind of really stand out.
Nice. Yeah. Yes, that's customizing and really connecting and honoring the client.
Yeah, and this one is another one going back to what you said before around what stage are you at in the coaching session? Yeah, so like with number 4, because we're still at the beginning, jumping forward into actions and strategies. Yeah.
Yeah. And number 8. So this one was the one the coach has worked with a client for 1 year. Client identified by their supervisor as a potential leader in the organization based on high quality work. Any questions on this one?
And this one, I had selected 3 as the best answer. This one was tough for me. And I can see why 1 and 3 were both good responses. I think 3 was a good response. Really asking them what they would need to maintain that new confidence. So any tips on selecting the best answer here,
May I share what comes up for me?
Yeah.
please? Yeah.
So when I was going through the MCC journey, the big thing was slow down. So that's what it's saying to me. Slow down, pause, acknowledge, help the client celebrate. And then you might get to which one is it?
Yeah,
3.
to 3, to
Mhm.
how to maintain that. That makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great advice.
And the worst, I felt that was this one's pretty obvious, but
Yeah.
suggest the client extends their coaching engagement. Not, not what we do, and not even good timing. I mean, so many, it's like a no, 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 not just a double no. All right, so those are basically some deeper explanations and what the ICF is really looking to accomplish is the coach familiar with yes, 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 this is coaching, and we're now sliding away from coaching.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we have the second part of this test key is around a very different style or a different style of question. We're no longer doing worst and best. So I'm curious, are these questions mixed in with the others, or do they come at a separate point? Or are we, does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. So the second half is basically just to help with comprehension. It's not reflective of the ICF exam. Yeah, and specifically comprehension of the ICF core competencies. So this was so the different scenarios and looking at what part of the session is is that scenario focused on, and also what core competency does it reflect. So is it foundation? Is it co-creating the relationship? Is it communicating effectively or cultivating learning and growth? So foundation now with the new ICF core competencies is really focused more on the overall partnership and establishing that the foundation of the partnership basically, and then co-creating the relationship. We start to fold in more of, we're establishing the agenda in session, we're creating it together. And what does that mutuality look like? And then communicating effectively, cultivating learning and growth tends to show up more at the end, but not always, right? Some of that happens in session, but some of it's also facilitating the wrap up. So if that helps.
Yep, that helped. Thank you.
I'm so happy. Thank you for bringing your questions, and good luck to everyone. Just know that you do have exactly what it takes to pass. And if you need additional support, we are absolutely here to help. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Matthew. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks. This was great.
Take care.
So exciting news is that Ray Perovic is back with us. I invited her to join us again after having taken and passed the ICF exam. And congratulations, you also got your MCC along the way.
Thank you, Laura. I'm glad to be here talking about passing.
Yes, it's so exciting. So I just would love, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your experience and yeah, any tips that you have now that you're on the other side of it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I was mindful of was mindset.
Okay.
So bringing coaching mindset to this whole process, because there's a lot of parts of me that were resistant and also kind of like, I have to do this kind of thing. So even getting coached about how to approach this exam in a way that might feel more like a learning process than something that I had to do. That was probably the biggest thing. And the whole logistical details gave me a little bit of anxiety because I'm somebody who likes to have access to water at all time. And then I tend to have a small bladder. Sorry if it's too much detail. So those logistical things really gave me a little bit of anxiety. So even making myself comfortable by talking to a person at the desk and cracking jokes and whatever it is that I could do to make myself comfortable through the process and familiarize myself with the environment, and talking to as many coaches who have taken the test about their lived experience was really helpful. Yeah. And there is like a ton of resources out there about, the links to the ICF sites about code of ethics or competencies or things like that. So making sure that I read each of them at least 3 times. So preparing diligently that way also was helpful.
Nice. I love what you said about getting coaching around mindset. I hadn't quite considered that. I was thinking, I always recommend private tutoring if somebody feels like the resources they're exploring, if there's any disconnects, a private tutor can help you with that. And I love that you you actually got some coaching around the mindset piece. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I do think it is about knowing yourself. So because I assess coaching students and then I also mentor, that I know the competencies. Like there's no doubt about it. So I knew that part for me was covered. So kind of reflecting on where it is that I need help. And I may be the minority in this, but the whole water and bathroom thing was really tripping me up, really. So I wanted to really shift my mindset of how I was approaching. So depending on some people, they might say, you know what? I go to those situations all the time where I don't drink for 7 hours and I'm fine. But I feel insecure about some of the competencies because I didn't learn coaching that way or whatever it is, then that may be the part that they might want to focus on. So this is not to say like, that's the way to do it, but even reflecting on where you need support would be helpful, I would think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you said you spoke to other people that had the lived experience, were you able to connect with people through your ICF chapter, or any tips on finding those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been an active member of ICF local chapter, which would be New York City for me, as well as I just have a very wide network of coaches that are not necessarily affiliated with New York City chapter. So I just kind of have a habit of when I'm setting my mind to accomplish something, I tap into a community first and say, hey, would anybody share your time to talk to me about such and such? So I did that with first MCC journey because I knew that was going to be a journey. And then the ICF credentialing test was coming up. So I did that, especially with taking it online versus taking it in person. And first I was set on taking it at home. But then I spoke to a couple of people. And then the final thing was when I spoke to one of the colleagues who also works with you. He did say, with all the leaves in your background, you're not gonna pass the environment. So when he said that, I was like, okay, let me just take that in person. And I'm so glad that I did. So even with that, talking to New York City coaches and then asking like, where did you take your test? Because New York City has a lot of different options. And then just asking about like those situations. And then I ended up taking out one of the centers that was recommended.
Oh, nice. I love that idea. That's great.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about that before.
Yeah, it was actually super easy in terms of the logistics, and they have it very organized. And I was very fortunate that I ended up getting a private room. So that was super, I was really grateful for that experience. And all of the folks working there was super friendly, unlike what I heard. So everything was really smooth. And then as soon as I took the test, I walked to the desk, and then the lady handed me this folded up paper. And then I opened it and it says I passed. So as easy as that. And then 2 minutes later, I had an email from ICF saying, congratulations, you're an MCC. I was like, whoa, this all happened in like not even one day, within the span of a few hours, super quick.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Any other tips or insights that you'd like to share with those that are in preparation mode?
Yeah, I think there seems to be a lot of hype around this test. And I'm not gonna say it was easy. But I would say not to get overwhelmed with the prospect of how challenging it can be, because then that can kind of take over and then it becomes really stressful. So again, managing how you're approaching this test is important. One logistical thing that I might do differently. So we get 5-minute break during the first and second parts. And because I didn't want to stress about needing to go to the bathroom, I didn't drink too much water. But then I ended up dehydrating myself and I was starting to get headache and all of those physical symptoms. Then it was difficult for me to focus. So I would say hydrate well if you can. Also, one of the biggest challenges that I had was timing. So I knew that we're supposed to spend about 2 minutes per question. But then because I happen to be a slower reader, and then some question could feel like a little bit confusing between, like, let's say B and C. Like A is clearly not the answer, D is not, but between B and C, it's like, and trying to discern the nuances and being really into it, and then end up spending like 3 minutes. So I was starting to run out of time toward the end in both parts. I'm pretty sure some people wouldn't have that problem, but especially if English is your second language or whatever reason, and yes, you could get that extension, but I didn't think I would need it because I've been here for so long. But time management, and I knew to pay attention to time, but still it became a challenge. So I would say don't get too caught up in one question if you're not sure. Pick something, flag it, move on. But I personally didn't even have time to go back to the questions that I flagged.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So you did take it in English
Yes.
as your language, and then you said there is an option for an extension if you're taking it in a second language?
Yeah, there is a document on ICF website that explains it extensively. So yes, you could ask for, I think, 1 hour extension if English isn't your first language and if that becomes an added challenge. Or I think if you're taking it in a country that's not English speaking. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to share wrong information, but all of it is on ICF website.
Okay, that is perfect and really good to know. Wonderful. Anything else?
Yeah, I would say connect with other coaches that's taken a test, or study together, share tips, and make the process as fun as you can. And this is a learning experience. I also learned more about myself, and then also some of the coaching skills. Oh, maybe one thing I would share is reading the FAQ section of the ethics was also helpful, because a lot of the questions were around, I think, contracting or third-party relationships, which for me was a bit challenging because I tend to lean toward clients' best interest. So reading those FAQ might be helpful. Also, mock test was really helpful. And what I did was sort of studying what I got wrong. So you had this great PDF about why certain answers are best and worst. This is not about what we would do as coaches all the time, but it is based on core competencies. So even studying what I tend to get wrong, and then how I tend to think versus what would be the best aligned option with core competencies. So again, it's understanding my own tendencies. And then in it, there was also great learning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. And that I think is super helpful about the reading the FAQ. I hadn't even considered that as another resource to, to really look at the ICF ethics through, a couple different lenses.
Yeah, because it is about the situational application. Unlike the CKA, it's not about just the knowledge. Yes, it is about the knowledge, but it's the understanding of application, I believe. So
yeah, that's a good distinction way to put it. Nice. Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So there you have it. We hope this video and tutorial has been immensely helpful for you and helps you feel you are equipped for the ICF exam. Just remember, you've done the hard work. You've completed your education and you have plenty of resources within you and outside of you to support you in this process. If you need anything at all or have any questions, always feel free to reach out. We are here to help, no matter whether you graduated from our school or you're coming in from a different platform. We're happy to answer any questions and get you the support that you need. This is Laurel Elders wishing you a happy coaching journey from one coaching geek to another.